Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. He has over 30 years with the FBI and compiled a bunch of stories that he put in his book entitled FBI Case Files Michigan, Tales of a G-Man. Let's welcome in Greg Stejskal. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And I want to say thank you for your service as well.
Well, thanks. It's something I always wanted to do, and it turned out it was every bit as good as I had hoped it would be, and it was a rewarding career. I enjoyed doing it.
Let's get into a little bit of your career. I've read the book, and folks, go to the show notes. I'm going to put a link there where you can get your hands on the book. It's well worth it. There's several stories. There's no way we can go over all of them, but I want to give the listeners a little bit about your background. Explain to me and tell my listeners, Superman was a childhood hero of yours. Was there any correlation to Superman and wanting to get into the FBI?
Not really, other than, there was the lead-in for the show, Fighting for Truth, Justice, and the American Way. And, I grew up in the 50s, and that show, at least where I lived, was a huge deal. I mean, we'd be outside playing, and all of a sudden somebody would say, "Hey, it's time for Superman," and we'd all run home to watch it. It was fun to see good guys win, and I think that sort of colored my the direction I was going to go.
You were also a Boy Scout. What impact did that have on you?
My older brother was a scout as well, as was my younger brother. I have two brothers, and all three of us became Eagle Scouts. But, not only did I learn the scout skills, but I learned a lot about leadership, being a patrol leader and stuff in the Scouts, and also, a lot of reliance on yourself and learning teamwork and a lot of different things that, and unfortunately I don't know that Scouts is as pervasive as it was when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. But, growing up, I mean, once again, where I lived, all my friends were in Scouts. And like I say, both my brothers were. So it was just something that you did, but it had a lasting impact on me growing up.
You attended Nebraska in Lincoln on a football scholarship and was accepted into the Nebraska College of Law. Greg, how did law and the FBI work together in the 70s?
Hoover was a lawyer, and J. Edgar Hoover, the founding father of the FBI, and he had a preference for agents to be attorneys. There was sort of a myth that all agents were either attorneys or accountants, which really wasn't true. But I'm guessing about 20 to 25% of the agents when I came in were attorneys. And it was very helpful to me. A good part of law school has nothing to do with criminal law, but there's a certain thought process of logic and things that is helpful for an agent, that you learn to think like a lawyer, and also the skill set that you learn. For example, I often had to write affidavits for search warrants or for what we call Title III wiretaps, things like that. I also had to be able to understand the criminal code, the federal statutes, and what would apply and what would be needed to prove a case. So those were all things that were helpful to me in the Bureau.
You said in the book that seeing the movie, The FBI Story, with Jimmy Stewart was a big reason why you wanted to be an FBI agent. My question I wanted to know is, did you ever get a chance to meet Jimmy Stewart?
I never actually met him, but we had, when Jimmy Stewart was alive, there was always this, because of that movie, I think primarily, he had a fondness for the FBI. And the Los Angeles office maintained a contact, a liaison with Jimmy Stewart. And what you could do is, if you wanted his autograph, you could request it, and periodically an agent would go out and talk to Jimmy, and in my case, I got a hold of a lobby card from the FBI story and sent it out there, and an agent took it over, and Jimmy Stewart personalized it to me and signed it. Still one of my prized possessions, but and you know, he sort of, and I think this was true for a long time, maybe up until the time Efren Zimbalist Jr. did the TV show, but I think Jimmy Stewart sort of personified what I believed and a lot of people believed was the ideal FBI agent.
When you hear the date, March 10th, 1975, what's the significance of that date?
Well, that's the day that I walked into what they call Main Justice, the Department of Justice headquarters in Washington, D.C., and went in there in the morning, and later on in the day, we all stood, raised our right hand, and took the oath, and we were given our FBI badges. We don't get our credentials, don't get our identification, but they gave us our badges after we swore the oath to the Constitution, very similar to what the president and other people in federal government swear, and it was meaningful for me. And the room we did it in, interestingly, was where the German Nazi saboteurs were tried at a secret trial during World War II, and that's where we took the oath.
From reading the book, and we're going to get into some of the cases, but I'm understanding, just going through the book, you're a humble guy that doesn't like to take credit for all your hard work and service. So I want to ask the question, how much did other federal agencies assist you with your cases?
Well, it depended on the case. For example, when I was doing drug cases, we oftentimes would work together with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and we would also work with the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, because a lot of times major drug dealers, not only are making a lot of money, they're not paying much in the way of taxes. So those were good criminal tax cases for the IRS. So that would be an example where we work with them. I worked with state police on a lot of investigations. Bank robberies, for example, are what we call collateral jurisdiction. That is, both the FBI and the state or local police would have jurisdiction. In another case that I worked, in fact, it was the first Environmental Protection Agency case that was prosecuted as a RICO, a racketeer influenced corrupt organization. And then I worked on that case with EPA agents. So, again, it just depends on the cases and who you end up working with.
You were assigned to one office in Detroit, Michigan, which covers the entire state of Michigan. In 1975, you started on the fugitive squad, and 1 month later, on July 30th, Jimmy Hoffa disappears. This was a kidnapping murder. Greg, from your involvement in this case, who set him up and why?
He was Jimmy Hoffa, who had been the president of the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters, IBT, and then he went to jail. And so he made arrangements for his sort of heir apparent, Frank Fitzsimmons, to take over the union. And then Frank Fitzsimmons, while Jimmy Hoffa was in jail, actually ran for the position and was elected the president of the Teamsters Union. Now, prior to Jimmy Hoffa going to jail, and he was a very effective union leader. He did a lot for the Teamsters Union and for the members, but he also was heavily involved with organized crime. It was sort of a symbiotic relationship. Organized crime helped him enforce sort of the discipline amongst some of the trucking companies, and they acted as sort of a muscle for the Teamsters Union on occasion. The Teamsters also had a relationship, a financial relationship with the mob, the mafia, or as it's probably more properly called, the La Cosa Nostra. And the Teamsters allowed the mob to have loans from the Teamsters Pension Fund at very desirable rates. And that money, this is sort of a secret relationship, that money was used by the La Cosa Nostra to purchase casinos in Nevada, primarily in the Las Vegas area, but elsewhere too. And those casinos, it was at that time they were purchased in secret. They would use straw people to make the purchases and stuff. It was a very lucrative arrangement, not only for the La Cosa Nostra, but also for the Teamsters. The return on the investment was very good. When Hoffa got out of jail, he wanted to again take control of the Teamsters Union. Frank Fitzsimmons now is pretty much ensconced as president. He doesn't want to give that position up, and the mafia has a very good relationship with Frank Fitzsimmons. Now, they had a good relationship with Hoffa, but Hoffa was his own man, and he was a tough guy and sometimes hard to deal with. But the mob was able to control Frank Fitzsimmons. He was much more malleable and would go along with pretty much anything they wanted to do. So they were reluctant to help Jimmy get back into the leadership role with the Teamsters. And so Jimmy Hoffa started to make noises that if they didn't support him getting back in control of the Teamsters, that he would give up the relationship, this financial relationship between the Teamsters and the mob. They became the mafia guys, and the primary liaison for this financial relationship took place in Detroit. It was the Detroit family of the mafia that had the primary liaison with Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters. That was Jimmy Hoffa's base of operations. It was also Frank Fitzsimmons' base of operations. So the two guys that were primarily acting as liaison, two capos in the family, Vito, Billy Jack Giacalone, and Anthony Tony Giacalone, were the ones that, and about, let me go back a little bit. Jimmy Hoffa, in order to, I think, show the seriousness of what he was saying about getting back in control of the mob, blew up Richard Fitzsimmons' car in Nemo's parking lot. Nemo's is a sort of an iconic bar located not too far from the Teamsters local in Detroit. And he blew that car up. Well, we think he blew it up. It's never been proven that Jimmy Hoffa did it, but it was it wasn't that he was going to try to kill the Fitzsimmons. He was just showing them that he had the ability to do that. Mm-hmm. And the car blew up in Nemo's parking lot. Frank Fitzsimmons and Richard Fitzsimmons, his son, were both in Nemo's at the time when the car blew up. A little while later, the Giacalones met with Jimmy Hoffa, and we don't know just exactly what was discussed, but I think Jimmy Hoffa felt that he was nearing an agreement where they would allow him to retake control of the Teamsters Union. And they supposedly arranged a meeting for him with them and Tony Provenzano, who was a Teamster and a Mafia member back in New Jersey. That meeting was going to take place in Detroit, as best we were able to determine from notes and what Jimmy Hoffa told others, he was supposed to meet them in the parking lot of the Marcus Red Fox. And he was there at the appointed time. Now, people saw him there. A lot of people knew Jimmy Hoffa. He had quite a bit of notoriety. People saw him. A couple people actually talked to him in the parking lot. And several witnesses saw him get into a car with some other people and drive out of the parking lot. That was about 3 o'clock on the afternoon. After that, nobody knows what happened.
Let me go here with this, Greg, on this case then. He was not declared legally dead until 1982. How do you prove murder without a body?
Very difficult, almost impossible. But it has been done, but it's pretty much an adage in the law that you can't prove a murder if you don't have a body. I mean, you can't even prove he's dead, so let alone prove a murder. So, and you know, we've always known who and why he was killed. The mob killed him because he was a threat to their relationship with the Teamsters. The Teamsters, of course, were at least Frank Fitzsimmons and his group were happy with it because he maintained power in charge of the Teamsters, and he was killed. And I think most of the agents that were involved in the investigation early on believed that they destroyed the body, and that he and we don't think that he was buried or anything like that. We think the body was destroyed. And I think sort of the prevailing theory was that it was they had access to an incinerator and a couple other things where they could have easily destroyed the body. And again, without a body, it's very difficult to prove a murder. They kept it, I think, very tight. There were very few people that, actually knew specifically what happened. And I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, who physically killed Hoffa, but we know who was involved, generally speaking, and we know why. So that's where we are.
Outside of the Hoffa case, just in general with your experience, what is the importance of observing body language and looking into someone's eyes to find out if they're telling the truth or not?
There's all kinds of things. The eyes are important. I think we've all seen when somebody, isn't making eye contact and, kind of looking around or looking down. And you read those things in context with other things, the way they're talking. Are they, and some of it's a matter of personality, but one of the things when I would do interviews is try to build a little bit of rapport with a person, make them feel relaxed, and then see how they react. It's nothing more than sort of it would be a very simplified form of a polygraph in a sense. Polygraphs really, they measure not body language, but if, for example, your heart rate and things like that. And it's the same type of thing. You can see a lot how people are reacting to questions by the way their body language is, and again, eye contact and things like that.
You had a story in the book, The Telltale Fingerprints, that leads to 3 murders. June 11th, 1979. What did you witness that had historical significance, but not really for almost 20 years later?
I was, at that time, working on the Detroit surveillance squad, and the surveillance squad had been set up by early on and was primarily created for us to follow people in the Detroit family and others that would come into town to visit them, the Detroit family being the mafia. And on different days, we'd follow different people. We had source information as to certain meetings and things that we would surveil. And on that particular day, that our surveillance squad, we actually had 2 crews out that day. And our crews were made up. We'd have 1-person cars, and we'd generally have 4 or 5 cars. at any particular location. And we had set up on a known business of Rafael Quasarano, who was he was a barber supply shop up in Macomb County, and we'd set up there. And we weren't really expecting anything special that day, but we would get a lot of intelligence by who we saw coming and going, and following Quasarano if he left. On that particular day, we saw Jack Tocco, who we knew is high up in the Detroit family, enter that business. And later we saw another guy who was a made man, Frank Bomarito, enter the business. Now, Frank came in a van and then came out of the business and left in Jack Tocco's car. And later we saw Jack Tocco, Quasarano, and a couple other guys come out of the business and get in that van and start driving west. And as they're driving, we're trying to speculate as to where they're going, because they continued well past the western suburbs of Detroit. And about the same time, we could hear on the radio the other crew that was up that day was following one of the other members of the family. They were heading the same direction we were. And we ended up north of Chelsea, Michigan, which is probably about 50 miles west of Detroit, but just basically out in the country. There was a game farm, a place where people could go in, and as I understand it, you could pay, and then you could, hunt certain animals in this game preserve there, private game preserve. As we were surveilling the entrance to the game farm, we saw several cars go in there. We were able to identify some of the people going in, and every car that at least that we could identify, we knew was tied into people in the mafia. So the Detroit family, and so we were trying to figure out whether this is some kind of big meeting or conclave, and so I got together with my crew. The other crew was there. They had followed their guy there, and so I said to one of the guys on my crew, we got to go in there and see what's going on. And a couple other people are kind of hesitant. They're going, well, yeah, maybe we should call in and get permission and stuff. And I kind of said, well, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission sometimes. So I had one of the other agents drive us, and another guy volunteered to go with me. He says, hey, if you're going in, you shouldn't go in alone. I'll go in with you. And it was this guy by the name of Keith Cordes, and Keith had played college football at University of Washington, and good guy, and maybe as stupid as I was that day. But anyway, we went around to the west end of where this property was and climbed over a fence, started going through the woods, and we walked for probably a mile or so into the woods, and we could hear them talking, but the foliage was so thick and stuff, we really couldn't see much, and we couldn't really understand what they were saying. And we're thinking, geez, if we get much closer, we'll be able to see them, but they'll be able to see us too. And up in front of me, I saw this place where the foliage had all been cleared. It was like a lane, and I realized it was an archery lane. There was an archery target at one end. It was probably 50 yards from where they were all meeting. And so Keith and I got behind the target. Keith said to me, you think this is a good idea, hiding behind a target? And I said, no, I don't think these guys are into archery. So I had taken my camera. We were all issued, all the guys on the surveillance squad were issued cameras. And this was the old days. It was using real film. And I had a 300 millimeter lens. So I rested the camera on top of the target and took a couple photos. And one of them in particular was a picture of Jack Tocco, and to his left was Vito Giacalone, that same guy that had met with Hoffa a few days before he disappeared. And on his other side was Anthony Corrado. Both of them were capos in the Detroit family. And, of course, Jack Tocco was high up. I think at the time he was second to the head of the family. And so I've got this picture of them. And then we, by that time, we had a plane up over the thing, and they said, the plane saying, hey, it looks like they're releasing some dogs. And so we thought, discretion's a better part of valor. So we took off through the woods, knowing that the dogs would find us otherwise. And so we went back out of the woods, and, I developed the photo. One of them turned out pretty well. There's a copy of it in the book. But, when we came out of there, we were thinking, we got this photo, and we're not exactly sure what was going on in there. Later on, we got source information, very good source information, that was the day we were celebrating Jack Tocco's promotion to be head of the family, the Detroit family of the mafia. And I talked to a mafia historian, a guy who's primarily expert on the Detroit family. He said, Greg, I don't know of any time anybody has ever witnessed something like that wasn't a member of the family. And believe me, there wouldn't be any photos of it because those guys know better than to have people taking photos. So,
right.
He said, so that, almost 20 years later, we had a big RICO trial, again, racketeer influenced corrupt organization. And Jack Tocco and all the hierarchy of the family were put on trial, and we introduced that picture into evidence. They didn't want it in evidence, but it turned out to be a key piece of evidence. I mean, there's nothing better than to show them a picture of a guy who is becoming the head of the family, who happens to be on trial for being head of the family. So, and interestingly, a few weeks before the trial, Vito Giacalone pled guilty. He did not go to trial. Several of the other guys did, but he didn't. He pled guilty, and much to the surprise of everybody, stood up in open court and told the judge. The judge asked him, why are you pleading guilty? And he said, well, I'm a member of the Detroit family of the La Cosa Nostra, and and I'm pleading guilty because I was involved in this stuff. And then to have that picture to show the jury on trial, and we could get it into the court record, that one of the guys in the picture, Vito Giacalone, just pled guilty to being a member of the Detroit family. So it went a long ways to proving what we were trying to prove. So,
yeah, that photograph led to, if I remember right in your book, like 50 counts in the RICO Act. Yeah.
And it wasn't just the photo. We had all kinds of other evidence, but that was a pretty strong piece of evidence as to the existence of the family and that what the hierarchy was and everything. But when we came out of the woods that day after taking the photo, there was some question whether we didn't know if we were going to get an incentive award or a letter of censure for going through the woods on our own. As it turned out, we got nothing, but later on we got the reward, at least of knowing that picture was valuable. So,
before I get into Operation Equine, explain how you met Bo Schembechler and what kind of relationship you had with Bo.
Bo, in 1982, Bo was the head coach of the University of Michigan football team, and obviously very successful coach. He called over to our FBI office and wanted to know if we could send a couple agents to come over and talk to the football team during summer camp regarding illegal gambling and, the threat to them in terms of, them getting involved in it or, being approached to provide information and stuff. And the guy that was in charge of the office, a guy by the name of Tom Love, Tom said, sure, we can do that. And Tom had a lot of experience in organized crime. And so Tom came to me, he says, Greg, I know you played college football and you obviously have had some organized crime experience as well. why don't you go with me and we'll talk to the football team about this stuff? And I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And I did. And apparently it went pretty well because Bo invited us back the next year, and I ended up doing it for the next 30-some years. But the next year when it came up, Tom said, Greg, you know, you handled that really well. Why don't you just take it from here? And so I ended up, each year I would invite some different people to go with me. So it wasn't just me. I got a guy from DEA who ultimately came in, and Hugh Shanahan, a great guy, a big Irish guy that very good public speaker. And he came in and talked to him about drugs and stuff. And I got a couple other agents, Marty Torgler, and some U.S. attorneys came with me. And so we did that, and I sort of developed a rapport with Bo. You know, Bo found out I had played football, actually. Not so much played as practiced football with Nebraska, but so we built up some rapport, and he had a big impact on my career in the Bureau as it worked out.
How did Bo help you start Operation Equine, which was the case about illegal trafficking of steroids?
Well, I don't know if help's the right word. I think he persuaded me to start the case. Anyway, I got a call from Bo one day. He says, Greg, I'd like to talk to you about something. Can you come over to my office sometime? And I said, yeah, sure. So I came over later that day, and Bo was there with Mike Gittleson, and Mike Gittleson was Bo's strength and conditioning coach. And Bo said, hey, Greg, you know, I know anabolic steroids have been made a scheduled drug, and it's a felony to sell them. And I said, yeah, I think that's true. And he said, well, I'm trying to find out what, if anything, is being done by the FBI or DEA or whomever as far as steroids are concerned. And I said, you know, Bo, I really don't know, but I'll see if I can find out. So I went back to the office and did a little research and found out basically nothing was being done. I mean, it was a scheduled drug, and it was a violation. But at that time, most of the resources for the so-called war on drugs were going towards cocaine, heroin, and to a lesser extent, large-scale operations selling marijuana. So nobody was really doing much about steroids. And so I talked to Bo about that, and Bo said, you know, Greg, this is becoming a big problem. He said, we know that there are a lot of college football players that are doing steroids, and he told me a couple stories, and then he said, and maybe more importantly, he said, we do these summer camps with high school kids coming in, and a lot of these kids are asking us not whether they should do steroids, talking to Gittleson, the strength coach and everything, but whether when they should start doing steroids. Like, it's just presumed by these kids that if they're going to play college ball, they're going to be doing steroids. So, and Mike Gittleson gave me a couple books to read, and I did some research. And about the same time, we had an agent's son that was playing baseball that got involved with steroids, and he ended up committing suicide, which is not uncommon with people using steroids. And I thought, you know, this is something that maybe should be addressed. So I proposed to the Bureau that we do an undercover operation. And the Bureau was pretty reluctant, but ultimately I got approval to do a short-term undercover operation, what we called a Group 2, which is a lower-level undercover operation. And I had 6 months to make it. I got a guy that I knew that was a lifter, an agent, to act as an undercover agent. And so we started doing it. Gittleson gave me the names of a couple gyms. But, you know, it was nobody had ever done a steroid operation like this before. So there wasn't a lot of there wasn't like a manual we could go to. So we just kind of winged it, and we made some low scale buys. It was usually from lifters that, they'd go to Mexico or something and buy steroids, come back. They would buy more than they needed for themselves and then basically finance the whole thing by selling them to other people. And so that early on, we were making some progress, but not a lot. And I knew we were coming up on our deadline, so I was basically telling the undercover agent, we're just going to have to wrap this up. I don't see us being able to go too much further since we got to close it down in 6 months, or at the end of 6 months. And all of a sudden, I got a call one day from the supervisor back at the bureau who said to me, "Hey, when are you going to put in for a renewal?" And I said, you guys made it clear to me that I had 6 months to make this work. And so I wasn't even contemplating doing a renewal. And they said to me, "Well, we got a call from the White House." Now, this was when George H.W. Bush was president. And the inquiry was what was being done about anabolic steroids. And you have right now, the only operating case where you are targeting, the distribution of steroids. So we want you to convert that to a Group 1 undercover operation, which means you have an indefinite period of time to do the case and a lot more funding. And from that point on, we were able to do a lot more, and ultimately we went all over the country, did a lot of stuff up in Canada, had a big case with the Mounties up there, and all over the United States, and took down about 70 pretty good sized dealers. We were no longer, and we never messed with users. That technically it was a violation, but we kept trying to go higher on the hierarchy and get the biggest dealers we could. We got some pretty good sized ones, and one big one down on the Mexican border, and like I say, up in Canada. And we got the dealer who was supplying, who had supplied Jose Canseco and Mike McGuire when they were playing for the Oakland A's. So it ended up being very successful. In fact, I think it's still the most successful steroid operation that has ever been done. So.
Yeah, the seizure of 8 to 10 million dosage units of real and counterfeit steroids. And people, get your hands on the book because it goes a little bit farther than that. He brought up a little bit about McGuire and Canseco, and there's some things in there about the MLB. And for all you sports fans out there, I'm going to leave you right there with the cliffhanger. Get the book and you can figure it out. But Greg, I want to get into the Unabomber. 16 bombs he set between 78 and 95. You are credited with identifying the Unabomber, but also I think you have an assist from Jim Smiley for receiving information from him to help you identify Ted Kaczynski. I'm not sure Jim knew he was giving you information that it was actually the Unabomber. Would that be correct?
That is correct. And I have to do this with a caveat because, I even talk about this in the story in the book about me identifying the Unabomber. Technically, I did. Actually, Jim Smiley and I identified the Unabomber, but he would have been identified anyway within a few days, probably. I and one or two other people were the first people to know that Ted Kaczynski was, in fact, the Unabomber. But, like I say, it would have happened anyway a few days later. It really was Dave Kaczynski, Ted's brother, who brought the information to us, and that's how it came about. But and I was working the case only because I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and of course Ted Kaczynski went to graduate school at the University of Michigan, and he had sent a bomb to a professor. One of the bombs, I believe it was in '85, to James McConnell, who was a professor at the University of Michigan, and that was how my involvement in the case began. And then when we got when they had put the manifesto in the New York Times and the Washington Post, David Kaczynski became convinced. He and his wife became convinced that Ted was in fact the Unabomber, but he had some of Ted's writings, other than the manifesto, that he sent to the task force. But they had taken out all of the personal information in the writings, and he, through an intermediary, sent them to the task force. Task force looked at it, and several of them were convinced, hey, whoever wrote this stuff also wrote the manifesto.
Mm.
But again, there were no names or anything in the information, except they were able to glean a few things out of it that either they forgot to redact or didn't think it was important to redact. They did find one place the name Ted, which can be, either Theodore or can also be, you don't know for sure. It could be, a middle name or something like that. And also that he had gone to graduate school at the University of Michigan, was born or grew up in the Chicago area, and had gone to Harvard undergraduate. And that was about the extent of the information they had. They had a time period, but it was pretty open-ended. And they wanted me, I get a call from a supervisor, a guy by the name of Joel Moss from the task force, who I had, he and I had talked because I had the McConnell bombing case in Ann Arbor. And he said, Greg, this is what we've got, this information. Would there be any way for you to find out who this is based on that information? I said, well, it's kind of sketchy, but maybe. And so I said, let me see what I can do. And I'm thinking, I can't go to the registrar's office. They're going to, number one, they're going to want a subpoena, and they're going to want to know what it's all about, which I was specifically told not to let them know. And I knew the university would be, it's not like we had great relationship with the university necessarily at the time. And so Jim Smiley was the assistant director of the Department of Public Safety at the university. In other words, the university police department. And I had known Jim when he was with the state police. We had worked some cases together. So I called Jim and I said, hey, listen, this is what I've got. I've got this, I've got Ted. He went to the University of Michigan graduate school. He grew up or was born in Chicago and gone to Harvard. And I said, and we've got this time frame, but it's, not real clear. It was about a 5 or 7 year time frame. He said, well, let me see what I can do. And, I also knew that he apparently had either been in physics or math. So at least we had it narrowed down to some departments. And, I didn't tell Jim what it was because I couldn't. And, but fortunately, Jim didn't think I was nuts. And he called back the following morning and said, I've got 5 names for you, but only one really fits all the criteria. And that's a guy by the name of Ted Theodore Kaczynski. And I said, okay. And he told me why he fit the criteria. And I said, okay. And, he didn't ask me what it was. I told him it was very important, but I couldn't tell him, and he didn't ask. And so I called Joel Moss back, told him what I had, and Joel said to me, hey, Greg, right now you and I are the only 2 people that know that Ted Kaczynski is the Unabomber. He was convinced, as was I, that this was the right guy. So I went from there. For about 6 weeks, I should say, I think it was 2 days, maybe 3 days later, Dave Kaczynski's attorney met with the task force and came in, and the task force, he said, I will tell you who the guy that wrote this stuff is if you make certain assurances to me, one of them being that, that the death penalty would not be pursued and some other things. And the guys on the task force, Bill Moss and a couple other guys, said to the lawyer, hey, would it help if we told you it's Ted Kaczynski? And at that point, the lawyer just said, well, I guess I can give you the rest of the information then. And he told us Ted was up in Lincoln, Montana. For 6 weeks, we put it under 24-hour surveillance, sent a crew up there to keep an eye on him. We were concerned not only that he might take off, not that he knew we were looking at him yet, but they were also concerned that he might send some more bombs, and we didn't want that. Now that we knew who it was, we didn't want that to happen. But the interesting thing is, and a lot of people don't realize this, we could pretty much prove, at least within a short period of time, we could prove Ted Kaczynski wrote the manifesto. But then you have to prove he's the Unabomber. We could not prove that he sent the bombs. We figured he did, but, knowing that and being able to prove it in court are two different things.
Sure.
So we were running around for 6 weeks trying to find enough probable cause to get a search warrant to search Ted's cabin up in Montana. And we knew on that day when we went in to search that cabin, if we didn't find something in that cabin directly tying Ted Kaczynski to the bombings, that we would have a lot of trouble proving he was the Unabomber. And fortunately, they went in that day, and it was virtually a treasure trove of evidence. There was bomb-making materials. He had kept journals describing every bomb he sent with diagrams. He had 2 bombs. One was pretty much done. The other one was all packaged up and ready to mail, even though in the manifesto he said that he wasn't going to send any more bombs if we printed the manifesto. Obviously, he wasn't going to keep that bargain. But after the search was over, he was immediately detained, arrested, and, of course, the rest is history. So that's how that ended up.
Listeners, I'm telling you, you have to get this book. Here's some more stories, and we're going to go to one more. There's a story in there about Waco and the Davidian compound. There's one about a veterans hospital murder case of poisoning patients, a General Motors executive who got busted for selling test cars, and even a tale of a stolen meteorite that was valued at $10,000. Those are all in the book, plus a whole lot more. Greg, I want to end with this one right here. And I don't know why this one stood out, but it just did. I kind of, when I read the opening paragraph, I went, wait a minute, what? And I got to go back and read it about the alias name Female Jones. A woman living in public housing in Ann Arbor discovered that she was not eligible for federal housing assistance because it appeared she was already receiving Section 8 payments. LaToya Cotton, a Michigan housing agent, developed a scheme that led to over $1 million in her pocket.
Yep. That case was towards the end of my career. And, it was, I think, relatively unique. I mean, it was a relatively simple scam, but the woman, and who knows how long it would have gone had that woman not made inquiries and found out that she couldn't get the welfare. But under the welfare system, there's what they call a Section 8 provision where you can get, if you qualify, you can get vouchers for rent. And the rent will be paid to your landlord. Certain housing facilities, private facilities, make allowance for that, and they'll receive these Section 8 vouchers and accept them as rent. And this LaToya Cotton had, even before she became an agent who would do the backgrounds and stuff and submit the applications for these people, she had set up a third party mail thing for real estate payments because she had been involved at some level in the real estate business and apartment rental. So what she did was she had a number of clients, and these people would come in and want to apply for Section 8 vouchers. And certain of those people, she would submit the application for the voucher, but she would put on there that the voucher should be sent to this rental agency. And that was a rental agency that she controlled. And then when that voucher application was approved, she would start to receive into her bank account that rental voucher payment. She would tell the applicant, "Oh, you didn't qualify this time," and there was only a limited number of these Section 8s, so the people would accept that, generally speaking. And then over time, she would rotate them so that it wasn't the same people receiving them the whole time. But, she was getting payments of $1,000, $1,500 per applicant per month, which was going directly into her bank account. Now, she had legitimate applicants as well, but say at any given time, she would have like 10 of these people receiving monthly payments, which was going directly into her bank account, unbeknownst to the applicant, and of course, unbeknownst to HHS. So when this one woman found out that she wasn't receiving her voucher payment, even though they were supposed to, the state started looking into it, one of the state auditors, and realized what was possibly happening and called me, and I got involved in doing the investigation because it was part of the Ann Arbor territory, and and so we made a case and ultimately did a search warrant and stuff. But what we found out is she had ripped off the federal government for over $1 million. She was living in a house at that time, which was valued at about $800,000, probably well over $1 million now. She was doing really well, and so that I titled the story "Robin Hood in Reverse." So she was stealing from the poor and giving to the rich being her. So.
Unbelievable story. Well, Greg, thanks for taking some time and telling us about just a few of the cases that you involved in the book. And like I said, listeners, please get your hand on it. You are going to love this read. But Greg, thanks for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Yes, and we may have to bring you back again and tell some more stories. There's so many in that book. I was trying to pick some good ones, but I may have to do this again.
That'd be great, Tommy.
All right, listeners, what I want you to do is check out my YouTube channel, The Light Tommy Canale, short inspirational videos to get you on the path to a greater you and a better life. The link will be in the show notes. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.